Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we step onto a narrow Irish road in 1845, where the air smells of damp earth, peat smoke, and something more troubling, the slow approach of hunger. You can hear a cartwheel groaning somewhere beyond the hedges, and a dog barking at nothing you can see. The fields look green enough to fool a stranger. That is the trick of it. From a distance, everything appears almost peaceful. Yet behind cottage doors, people count potatoes with the seriousness of bankers counting gold, and mothers scrape the last meal from blackened pots while pretending not to worry. What do you do when the land that raised you begins to fail you? What do you carry when your whole life must fit into one bundle? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and you walk through rural Ireland as if the island itself is holding its breath. The lane beneath your shoes is slick with recent rain. Mud clings to the hem of your coat. Stone walls divide the fields into careful pieces, each one looking old, stubborn, and slightly tired, much like the people who work them. In many parts of Ireland, the countryside is full of small tenant farms, patches of land rented from landlords who may live nearby, or may live comfortably in England and think of this place only when rents are due. You do not own the soil you dig. You borrow it, season by season, paying for the privilege with labour, money, and worry. Morning begins early and cold. A faint grey light gathers at the window. The cabin smells of ashes, damp wool, and stale smoke from the peat fire that never seems strong enough. The walls are plain. The furniture is sparse. A stool, a rough table, maybe a chest for clothes if the family has been lucky. Sometimes several people sleep in one room, their breathing soft in the darkness, with a pig or chickens not very far away. Charming, if you are a poet. Less charming when you're trying to keep warm. For many rural families, the potato has become the centre of a life. It is not glamorous. Nobody sings grand songs about a boiled potato, yet it feeds large families from tiny plots better than almost any other crop. Potatoes can produce enough food on a small patch of ground to keep parents and children alive through a hard year. You eat them mashed, boiled, baked in the ashes, sometimes with a little buttermilk, sometimes with salt, sometimes with nothing else at all. Day after day. They fill the belly and steady the body. It is a plain kind of dependence, and a dangerous one. In the summer and autumn of 1845, that dependence begins to feel like a trap snapping shut. A strange disease spreads through the potato crop. People walk into the fields and find plants blackening, leaves curling, the smell oddly rotten and sweet, like something spoiled under a blanket. Historians identify the blight as Phytophthora infestans, though that name would mean little to most country people staring at ruined drills. What matters is simpler. The food is vanishing. A field that looked promising can become a field of decay in days. You lift a potato and it turns to foul pulp in your hand. The fear is immediate, but not yet fully shaped. At first, many hope the damage is local. Perhaps the next parish will be spared. Perhaps the lower field is still sound. Perhaps God will be merciful, and the rest of the crop will hold. People have always hoped in this manner, and it is one of the cheaper habits available to the poor. Yet the bad news spreads with travellers, priests, labourers, and market gossip. One district after another reports the same ruin. A smell of rot hangs over more than the fields. It settles into conversation. You hear it at chapel gates on Sunday. You hear it near the forge. You hear it in whispers exchanged over ditches. Men speak quietly about rents. Women speak quietly about children. Quietly is how great panic often begins. Not with a shout, but with a lowered voice. The world around you is not empty of politics. Even if you would rather spend less time with politics and more time finding supper, Ireland in 1845 lives under British rule, and the structure of landholding has long made life brittle for the rural poor. Many Catholic families rent from Protestant landlords or middlemen. Holdings are often subdivided across generations, becoming smaller and smaller, until a family survives on a strip of ground that seems better suited to discouragement than agriculture. A pig may be sold to pay rent, eggs may be sold, labour may be hired out at harvest. Almost everything useful can leave the house before comfort ever enters it. There are richer farmers, market towns, grazing land, and export agriculture too. This is one of the bitter truths. While many poor people depend on potatoes for survival, Ireland also produces grain, livestock, and butter. Historians still argue over how much could realistically have been redirected to feed the starving once the crisis deepened, and how much was constrained by markets, contracts, transport, and policy. The argument matters, though it offers little warmth on a wet evening in a cabin. What you feel is the sharper fact that food exists, somewhere, yet does not easily become yours. The landlord's agent may arrive with ledgers and manners polished just enough to be annoying. Rent day has a way of turning every household object into a possible sacrifice. A shawl, a pot, a stool, a hen. Anything might be sold. Eviction is not merely a legal action. It is a terror with practical details. A roof can be stripped. A wall can be pulled down. A family can be turned onto the road with children, bedding, and nowhere sensible to go. There is a reason people speak of America in low, intense voices. An ocean is terrifying, yes, but so is a bailiff. In the village, the priest offers comfort, warnings, and sometimes letters for those who have kin abroad. The Catholic Church is woven deeply into daily life, not only as faith, but as structure, memory, and gathering place. The bell carries across damp air. Candles flicker. Clothes steam slightly from the rain. You kneel among neighbours who know the texture of your hardship without needing it explained. There is relief in that. There is also embarrassment. Poverty is easier when private, and almost never private. You begin to notice how often America enters conversation, not always dramatically. Sometimes as a scrap of rumour. A cousin in New York found work unloading ships. A brother in Boston sends a few dollars home. A girl from the next parish married a mason in Philadelphia. A widow in County Clare receives a letter with terrible spelling and miraculous money tucked inside. Such letters are read and reread until the folds soften and the ink fades. They carry whole geographies in clumsy lines. Streets of brick, wages and cash, meet on weekdays. Imagine such extravagance. Of course, not every tale is cheerful. Some say the voyage is brutal. Some say cities in America are full of thieves, Protestants, and men who will cheat you before breakfast. To be fair, this may also describe several places much closer to home. Yet the stories keep coming because they offer something stronger than certainty. They offer motion. When the land under you no longer feels reliable, movement begins to look like reason. You're not a hero standing on a cliff, nobly choosing destiny. You're a person with sore hands and damp shoes, trying to understand whether staying is safer than leaving. That is a very different kind of drama. Much quieter, more exhausting. In many cabins, the evening meal becomes a study in shrinking expectations. A pot simmers weakly over the fire, steam rises, carrying the plain scent of boiled potatoes, if there are still potatoes worth boiling, or perhaps meal stirred into water. Children watch the pot with solemn concentration. Hunger makes philosophers of people who never asked for the job. Every spoonful is measured. Every absence is noticed. Nobody says the worst thought aloud too often, because saying it gives it shape. But you can feel it in the room. What happens if the next crop fails too? There is an odd little tidbit from this world that feels almost too intimate for history books. In some poor households, people treasured the warm place in the ashes where potatoes had baked because it held the smell of a proper meal even after the food was gone. That faint earthy scent, mixed with smoke and char, could linger like a memory of fullness. Human beings are heartbreakingly adaptable, also slightly absurd. One of our species' specialties is trying to draw comfort from a fireplace that smells like yesterday's supper. Outside, the sounds of the countryside continue with stubborn calm. Rain taps the thatch. A donkey snorts. Somewhere a fiddle starts up in a public house, because music does not wait for ideal conditions. Laughter rises too, surprising and sharp. Irish rural life is not a single note of misery. There are fairs, wakes, songs, courtships, stories, and flashes of humour dry enough to preserve meat. People joke because people have always joked, especially when circumstances deserve a rude answer. Gentle sarcasm may not fill a pot, but it does make the evening pass more tolerably. Still, the practical calculations grow harsher. If one family member leaves, can wages be sent home if a son goes first? Might he make a place for sisters later if passage can be purchased? Who travels? The strongest, the youngest? The one most likely to survive the crossing, emigration is not simply a dream of adventure. It is often a household strategy shaped by desperation and arithmetic. Sometimes passage is assisted by relatives abroad. Sometimes landlords contribute to clear estates of poor tenants, which can be presented as generosity or convenience depending on your mood and your honesty. Sometimes a family sells nearly everything it owns to buy a ticket. The bundle of possessions becomes a summary of an entire life. Spare shirt, blanket, rosary, maybe a pot, maybe a pair of shoes saved for town, maybe a small keepsake tucked where nobody can steal it. You cannot pack certainty. You cannot fold up a familiar road. The weather presses close to everything. Ireland's dampness enters cloth, walls, bedding, even bone. You wake feeling the cold in your fingers. You walk through air that smells of wet grass and turf smoke. You press your palm to the cabin wall and feel chill seeping through. Touch matters in this world. Rough wool against the neck, wooden spoon in the hand, mud sucking at the heel, a child's warm forehead. These are not grand political facts, but they are the texture of real life. And real life is what drives people towards ships. Scholars continue to debate how much people in late 1845 understood the scale of what was beginning. Some argue many saw it first as a terrible harvest failure, not yet the opening of a years-long catastrophe. Others suggest local memory of hardship made communities grasp the danger almost instantly. Both views contain something true. Disaster rarely arrives with a brass band and clear labels. It seeps in, then suddenly stands in the doorway as if it has always lived there. At market, faces look strained. Buyers have less money, sellers have less cheer. News from nearby counties travels beside carts and boots. You can smell animals, spilled ale, damp hay, and manure under the sharper scent of anxiety. Men pause mid-conversation when someone better informed joins them. Women look at flour prices with expressions that could curdle milk. Every practical decision now carries moral weight. Do you pay rent, buy food, save for passage, help kin, or pretend one more week will somehow sort itself out? At night, when the fire burns low and shadows soften the room, America becomes a thought large enough to fill the silence. Not a shining fantasy. Not exactly. More like a door in the dark that may open onto safety or onto another form of suffering. You picture harbours you have never seen, streets where nobody knows your father's name, work that might break your back yet still pay coin at week's end, bread you did not grow, walls you do not recognise, a life not measured by one crop. The choice does not feel noble. It feels raw. To leave is to admit the old arrangement is failing. To stay is to trust a future that already smells faintly rotten. So you lie awake listening to the rain on the roof, the fire settling into embers, and the breathing of family in the dark, while outside the fields wait under cloud, green and ruined at once. And the whole island seems balanced on that painful question of whether home can still keep you. You arrive at the port with your bundle cutting into your fingers and a strange hollowness beneath your ribs that has very little to do with breakfast. The town smells of salt, tar, wet rope, horse dung, fish scales, and too many people packed too close together. Gulls wheel overhead, crying like they have urgent complaints to file with the sea itself. Carts rattle over stones, boots slap through puddles, men shout names, prices, directions, warnings. The harbour is a place where nothing seems still, not even your thoughts. This is where private sorrow becomes public business. On a country road, leaving can still feel half-imagined. At the docks, it acquires tickets, trunks, fees, signatures, delays, and suspicious men with quick smiles. The water lies beyond the quayside in a grey sheet, moving gently enough to seem innocent. That is almost rude. It should at least look dramatic. You are not alone. Of course. The port is crowded with families from inland villages and coastal parishes, each group carrying its own mix of fear and hope. Women grip children by the wrist. Old men lean on sticks and watch everything with narrowed eyes. Young men try to look useful, which mostly means standing near luggage and pretending they know how ships work. The bundles piled around people tell their stories with brutal efficiency. A rolled blanket, a patched shawl, a wooden box tied with a rope, tin cups, a skillet, a Bible wrapped in cloth to keep it dry. Everything reduced to what can be carried, lifted, and defended. Some ports are busy Irish gateways such as Cork, Limerick, Waterford, or Belfast, where emigrants gather in rising numbers as the crisis deepens. Others leave through smaller routes, crossing first to Britain and then onward from Liverpool. One of the great funnels of Atlantic migration. The exact path depends on money, kin, and luck, which is to say it depends on things rarely distributed with fairness. A family may travel for days to reach the coast, sleeping in lodging houses or barns, eating what little they can afford, and trying not to lose each other in towns that move faster than country life ever does. The lodging houses near the waterfront are an education in human closeness. Air hangs thick with damp clothes, lamp smoke, cabbage, old straw, and the stale breath of rooms too full for comfort. You lie beside strangers separated by inches and circumstance. A baby coughs. Someone snores with impressive confidence. Floorboards creak. Outside, wheels grind over cobbles well into the night. Sleep comes in fragments. So does dignity. Ticket agents and brokers occupy a special place in the emigrant imagination, somewhere between necessary evil and active menace. Some are honest enough, selling passage on ships headed for North America with terms more or less as described. Others are not. They overcharge, confuse routes, hide conditions, or promise departure dates that shift like smoke. You stand in line listening to accents from different counties blend into one anxious murmur. Coins are counted twice, then counted again. Hands tremble as money changes owners. One wrong choice can mean missing a sailing, losing savings, or boarding a vessel even less fit for life than usual, which is saying a great deal. There is paperwork, though not always the sort that makes anyone feel secure. Names are written down by clerks who may misspell them, shorten them, or replace Irish forms with whatever sounds easiest to their own ear. A family's identity can be nudged sideways by a pen scratch in a noisy room. Historians debate how often names were truly transformed at ports versus changed gradually later by employers, priests, officials, and the immigrants themselves. What is certain is that many emigrants passed through systems where their names felt fragile, dependent on literacy they did not always possess. You know who you are. The ledger may have other ideas. The priests are easy to spot. They move through the crowd with black coats, tired eyes, and an air of practiced steadiness. Some hear confessions, some bless travellers, some write or read letters for those who cannot manage the page. The sound of prayer mixes with creaking cordage and shouted harbour orders. A woman clutches a rosary so tightly the beads mark her palm. A man removes his cap. Children look up, bored and solemn at once. Faith does not solve the price of passage or the danger of the Atlantic, but it offers order in a place where nearly everything else feels unsettled. There are farewell scenes everywhere, and they are rarely graceful. Tears begin suddenly. They stop just as suddenly when another task demands attention. A mother presses bread into a daughter's hand. A brother gives advice nobody requested. A father who has spoken little all morning grips a shoulder for 1 second too long, then steps back as if distance might make the whole thing easier. It does not. People promise to write. People promise to send money. People promise reunion. Some of these promises will be kept. Some will be defeated by poverty, sickness, shifting addresses, or simple time. The port hears them all without comment. One of the strangest features of departure is how much waiting it involves. In the imagination, emigration is dramatic movement. In reality, it includes hours by a quay staring at crates, puddles, and damp planks while officials, captains, tides, and weather decide your fate. You wait to board. You wait for baggage to be checked or ignored. You wait for a relative who has vanished into a crowd. You wait while a sailor shouts at another sailor about something involving rope and stupidity. The sea voyage begins with a lesson in helplessness. Close to the water, every surface feels coated with some combination of salt and grime. Your fingers come away sticky from railings. Rope scratches your skin. Wind slips under your clothes and leaves a cold trace along the neck. Sound bounces off the stone quays and hulls, hammering from a shipyard, chains clanking, horses snorting in harness, the slap of waves against wood, a sailor laughing too loudly. Somewhere nearby, fish are being gutted, and the metallic smell mingles with seaweed and smoke. It is impossible to forget you are near the edge of one world and the opening of another. There is commerce in everything here. Vendors sell bread, fruit, cheap cloth, tobacco, pies, and small comforts to people who should be saving every coin. Yet hunger and stress make poor economists of many of us. A hot drink on a cold morning can feel as necessary as a legal document. A child sees a bun and stares. A mother hesitates. A penny disappears. The body has its arguments. Among emigrants, information circulates in broken pieces. Which ship is safer? Which captain is cruel? Which route reaches Quebec and which reaches New York? Whether steerage rations are bearable. Whether passengers may cook for themselves. Whether trunks are searched. Whether America is full of jobs or full of lies. The answers shift depending on who speaks. A man swears his cousin crossed in 14 days. Another says 6 weeks. A woman insists the best thing is to sew coins into a hem. Someone else warns that thieves know the trick already. Advice multiplies whenever certainty vanishes. A quirky detail survives from accounts of departure ports. Some emigrants brought little packets of Irish earth or a few clods wrapped in cloth. Not because such items had practical use, but because touching home mattered when almost everything else was being surrendered. It sounds sentimental until you imagine never again seeing the exact shade of soil where your family dug and planted. Human beings will carry astonishingly impractical objects when emotion outranks logic. Quite right too. Not all departures are voluntary in spirit. Even when they are voluntary on paper, landlords sometimes assist emigrants with passage, partly from pity, partly from calculation, partly from the belief that clearing impoverished tenants would reduce burden and disorder. Opinions on this vary sharply. Some remembered such schemes as rescue from impossible conditions. Others saw them as polished expulsion, a tidy way to remove the poor. Scholars continue to disagree about the balance between coercion and relief in different cases, because motives were mixed and experiences differed wildly from estate to estate. The dockside, however, is not a seminar room. It is a place of whetstone and racing hearts. Children react to all this with the unnerving flexibility of children. One complains of hunger, one falls asleep on a trunk, one starts crying because a cap has been lost, then stops crying because a gull has stolen a fish head and become briefly fascinating. Adults carry the meaning, children carry the noise. Perhaps that is merciful. You notice class differences even here. Cabin passengers, when present, are better dressed, less burdened by visible panic, and buffered by money from certain indignities. Steerage travellers cluster where the bargains and uncertainties are thickest. Their clothes hold the smells of road travel, farm work, smoke, and rain. Their hands are calloused. Their provisions are humble. The Atlantic does not become kind for the poor. It becomes crowded. Boarding itself can be chaotic. Gangplanks tremble under boots. Sailors bark at people to move faster, then slower, then in some third rhythm known only to sailors and minor gods. Baggage knocks against knees. A hen may protest from a basket. A child may refuse to climb. You grip the rail and feel the roughness of weathered wood under your palm. Below, the water laps and swirls, dark between ship and quay. For a moment the height feels wrong, the ship unstable, the whole venture absurd. Which, to be fair, it is. When you turn back toward the shore, the crowd appears both close and already distant. Faces blur among hats and shawls. Hands lift. Some wave vigorously. Some do not wave at all, perhaps because waving admits finality. The town rises behind the quay in stone and smoke, church towers, warehouse roofs, narrow streets, all dampened by the maritime air. You try to memorize it, though it is not your home place. It is simply the last solid ground beneath your own country. The ship has its own smell, harsher than the harbour. Tar, bilge water, damp timber, unwashed bodies, old cargo, and the faint sourness of sickness not yet fully aired out. You step into spaces that seem smaller than promised. Light falls thinly through openings. The boards creak. Somewhere overhead a sailor runs across the deck and the thud carries through the structure like a warning. You locate the patch of room that will be yours, or near enough yours for the crossing, and understand at once that privacy has now become a luxury for other people. Yet even here, on the brink of departure, there are sparks of startling tenderness. Someone shares oat cake. Someone ties a stranger's blanket more securely with spare cord. A girl sings softly to a younger child. A man who has been stern all day kisses his wife on the forehead with such care that several nearby people look away. Hardship does not erase kindness. It merely gives it less space to sit down. As the tide and orders finally align, movement begins. Ropes are cast off. Sailcloth shifts. Water churns. On shore, voices rise in one last wave of shouting, prayer, instruction, sobbing, and names called into the wind. The gap between ship and quay widens inch by inch, then yard by yard. That widening feels physical, like something being drawn through your chest. The port, with all its mud, scams, blessings, waiting, and noise, starts to slide away. The smell of fish and dung yields slowly to the raw breath of open water. Gulls follow for a time, white against the dull sky, then wheel back toward land as if they know exactly where they belong. You remain by the rail until cold seeps through your sleeves and the shoreline softens into distance. Behind you, the ship murmurs with prayers, retching, whispers, and the rustle of people settling into a journey they cannot pause. Ahead lies only sea. Beneath your hand, the timber is damp and splintered. In your mouth, the taste of salt arrives before the spray does. And in that uneasy hour, suspended between quay and ocean, you discover that departure is not a single moment at all. It is a long unfastening as one knot at a time, until the land releases you and there is nothing left to do but keep your balance. The sea teaches you very quickly that romance is a luxury item. On the first full day out, the ship rises beneath your feet with a slow, sickening roll, then drops just enough to make your stomach question every choice that brought you here. The air below deck is close and damp. It smells of wet wood, old straw, salt, vomit, and too many frightened bodies trying to breathe the same tired air. Somewhere a child is crying. Somewhere else a man is praying under his breath with the kind of concentration usually reserved for surgery. This is steerage, or near enough to it. The part of the ship where the poor cross the Atlantic packed tightly with their bundles, cooking gear, provisions, and private grief. The phrase coffin ship would later cling to many famine-era vessels, and not without reason, though the term can flatten real differences between ships. Some crossings are merely miserable, others become deadly. Much depends on weather, crowding, sanitation, provisions, and the skill or indifference of the crew. Historians still dispute exactly how representative the worst accounts were, because shipping conditions varied by route and year. That does not make the bad stories less chilling. It only means misery had a range. Your sleeping place is a berth of rough timber, narrow enough to make turning awkward, hard enough to remind you of every bone in your side. Blankets collect dampness from the air, clothes never quite dry. Bodies lie close, separated by inches, snoring, coughing, muttering in sleep. Privacy is now a memory with no practical use. You wake to someone else's boot near your face, and someone else's elbow pressing your ribs. The ship creaks constantly, as if resenting each passenger in a separate complaint. Above deck, when you can get there, the wind slaps your cheeks and the cold tastes sharp enough to feel clean. The open air is relief. Salt spray settles on your lips, Ropes groan. Sails crack. Water stretches in all directions, grey or green depending on the light, beautiful in an almost insulting way. Beauty seems unfair when your stomach is trying to leave through your mouth. Still, many passengers force themselves up because the deck offers what the lower spaces cannot. Space, air, the horizon, a chance to believe this moving wooden box is heading somewhere rather than drifting at the edge of the world. The first days are often the hardest for seasickness. Men who believe themselves solid as gateposts are reduced to pale silence. Women cling to rails with grim dignity that lasts until dignity loses to necessity. Children either adapt with alarming speed or become tiny fountains of despair. Meals, if attempted, seem briefly hopeful and then immediately regrettable. A biscuit chewed carefully can still return with surprising enthusiasm. The ship, meanwhile, rocks on, unimpressed. Food is a daily concern and rarely a pleasure. Passengers may carry their own provisions, usually simple things that keep well enough: oatmeal, meal, bread, biscuits, potatoes if they last, perhaps bacon or a dried fish if the family has been fortunate. On some vessels, rations are issued. On others, passengers must manage more for themselves. Cooking is awkward and often done at shared galley spaces when weather allows. Fires, pots, lanes, and tempers all require management. The smell of boiling meal mingles with smoke and brine. Grease sputters, tin cups knock together. A spilled pot can feel like tragedy. Water is another matter. Fresh water is precious, rationed, watched, and not always as clean as anyone would like. Barrels turn stale. Casks leak. Cups are measured with care. You learn to value each swallow. A dry mouth and a salt wind make poor companions. Nothing on board is simple once it must be shared by hundreds. Sanitation is grim. Let us be honest in the sleepy dark. It is grim. Chambers fill. Buckets spill. Bad weather can keep people below deck. Where air thickens and foulness grows, the smell becomes almost physical, pressing against the nose and throat. Clothing picks it up. Bedding holds it. A person who never imagined being indifferent to filth can become astonishingly practical within a week. Survival narrows the list of acceptable complaints. Disease thrives in such conditions. Fever spreads. Diarrheal illness weakens people already underfed. Measles plus typhus, dysentery, and other infections find easy passage among cramped bodies and shared surfaces. A cough in the night draws attention. A flushed forehead draws more. Mothers touch children's faces with the back of the hand and pretend calm. Men glance at each other and look away. Medical care aboard many emigrant ships is limited or inconsistent. Some vessels have surgeons or doctors of some sort. Others offer little beyond prayers, guesses, and whatever remedies passengers have carried in bottles or memory. One odd detail from emigrant accounts feels almost absurd until you picture it. People sometimes try to freshen the air below by slicing onions or carrying vinegar-soaked cloths near the nose, believing strong smells might ward off sickness. The science was shaky. The desperation was not. When the air itself seems hostile, even an onion begins to look like a strategic ally. Human history is full of noble improvisation and slightly ridiculous vegetables. Time at sea becomes strange. Days are measured less by clocks than by light, meals, waves, and routine discomfort. Morning grey slips through hatchways. Noon brings the brightest patch of deck. Evening closes the lower spaces into deeper shadow and thicker breath. Nights are long. The ship sounds different after dark. Water thuds against the hull. Timber clicks and sighs. Somewhere above, boots cross the deck in bursts. Below, the sleeping and sleepless shift around each other in a soft chorus of coughs, whispers, and children whimpering from bad dreams or worse bellies. Yet routine does emerge, because people will build pattern anywhere if left alone with enough fear. Someone cleans a corner, someone tends a child not their own, someone keeps track of prayer times, someone tells stories, cards appear, songs appear, jokes appear, often dry enough to survive a storm. Irish humour does not vanish at sea. It simply grows paler and more pointed. A man may look at a watery porridge and remark that the Atlantic seems determined to join every meal. Another may announce that the rats appear healthier than the passengers and therefore better informed. Laughter comes quickly, then fades quickly, but it matters. You begin to know the faces around you, the woman with the red shawl who hums while mending, the old man who claims to have crossed waters rougher than this, though nobody fully believes him, the boy with sharp eyes who can slip through crowds without touching anyone, the couple who speak softly at night as if still sitting by a hearth instead of trapped in a rolling dormitory. Communities form in fragments. Shared hardship is an efficient matchmaker for acquaintance. Religious practice continues on board, though adapted to the movement and noise. Rosary beads slip through fingers. Prayers are murmured, sung, or silently repeated while the ship pitches. On calmer days, a gathered prayer may rise from one cluster of passengers and spread outward until half the deck is listening. Faith offers structure, but also sound. Familiar words make the space feel briefly less foreign. The sea remains vast. A prayer makes the human part of it feel less tiny. Weather changes everything. In calm seas, the voyage can feel merely tedious and foul. In rough weather, it turns theatrical in the most unwelcome sense. Wind screams through rigging. Rain lashes the deck. Water crashes over planks with a force that startles the body even when expected. Hatches may be closed, trapping passengers below in dimness and stink while the ship groans around them. You brace yourself against timber slick with damp and feel the entire structure shudder. Loose items shift. A child shrieks. Someone is sick again. It seems impossible that wood and nails should hold against so much moving water. Yet often they do. Storm nights stretch the nerves thin. Darkness deepens every sound. The ship climbs and falls. Creaks become cracks in the imagination. Historians continue to debate how passengers interpreted danger during these crossings, whether experienced coastal people judge storms more calmly than inland families, or whether fear equalized everyone once visibility vanished and the deck tilted sharply enough. Whatever the answer, the body understands peril in very old ways. You clutch wood. You wait for the next crash. You promise things to heaven with unusual sincerity. Death is present on some voyages, impossible to ignore when sickness spreads or the weak fail. A child may fade after days of fever. An elderly passenger may simply stop rallying. A mother weakened by hunger before embarkation may not survive the strain. Such losses mark the ship heavily, voices lower, faces close. The small ceremonies possible at sea carry a particular sorrow. The water receives what land would have kept. Even when accounts differ on frequency, the emotional fact remains the same. A crossing can teach you how fragile a human life feels when surrounded by miles of cold indifference. And still, not every hour is terror. There are mornings when light spills across the waves in sheets of silver, and the air smells bright, clean, almost medicinal after the foulness below. There are afternoons when children chase one another in the narrow safe spaces allowed, laughing as if they are in any yard on earth. There are evenings when a tune begins quietly and gathers strength, one thin voice joined by another, until the deck holds a song shaped by homesickness and stubbornness. Music floats strangely over water. It feels both brave and breakable. Sailors remain a class apart, skilled, rough, sometimes helpful, sometimes curt. Their language is full of ropes, spars, curses trimmed for mixed company, and judgments about weather that sound like private theology. To passengers, they can seem either essential protectors or impatient tyrants, depending on the day and the captain's discipline. You watch them move across the deck with a confidence you envy. They belong to the ship in a way you never will. They know which sounds matter. You react to all of them. The ship's doctor, where present, can become a figure of uneasy hope. People bring complaints, symptoms, and terrified children. Remedies may be dispensed sparingly. Advice may sound thin against the realities of infection and malnutrition, yet the very presence of someone identified as medical creates a little theatre of reassurance. Whether that reassurance is deserved is another matter. The 19th century is not exactly overflowing with miracles in a bottle. Weeks seem both endless and oddly compressed. One day folds into the next until you struggle to count how long you have been afloat. The sea scrubs ordinary markers away, hair grows untidy, faces hollow or redden, hands crack from salt and cold, clothes chafe, skin itches. You stop expecting comfort and begin celebrating small mercies. A dry patch of blanket, a calm afternoon, a child keeping down supper, a breeze through the hatch. Tiny triumphs, very tiny, yet genuine. Sometimes the ocean offers strange gifts. Porpoises race the bow. Gulls appear far from land, causing arguments about whether land must therefore be near. A sunset turns the entire western sky into copper and rose, making even the most miserable passengers lift their eyes. Someone points to a distant sail. For 10 minutes everyone discusses that other ship, as if it were a cousin glimpsed in a market. The mind craves novelty. At sea, a new cloud can become entertainment. You also learn the sound of longing in ordinary talk. People describe farms, lanes, wells, fields, saints' days, dances, fairs, even neighbours they disliked. Memory becomes selective and almost luxurious. A muddy yard at home grows soft around the edges once replaced by bilge stink. Human beings are very talented at revising discomfort into tenderness after a suitable change of scenery. The Atlantic, it turns out, is excellent at making old inconveniences seem charming. Toward the latter part of a crossing, a different energy begins to creep through the ship. It is not joy exactly, more like sharpened attention. Rumours circulate that land is near. A sailor has seen birds. The captain has altered course. The water looks different. Someone swears the air smells less oceanic, which may be nonsense but is reported with confidence anyway. Bundles are checked. Caps are brushed. Faces wash as best they can. The voyage has thinned patience to a thread, but hope now tugs at that thread with steady fingers. You stand by the rail in a coat that smells of salt, smoke, and the long company of strangers, while the wind presses damp hair against your temple and the ship keeps cutting forward through the cold, heaving water. Beneath you, the deck is slick and alive with motion. Behind you, the steerage spaces murmur with coughs, prayers, and the rustle of people preparing themselves for whatever waits beyond the horizon. Ahead, hidden still, is a shore you have imagined so many times it almost feels remembered. The sea has stripped life to appetite, endurance, smell, touch, and faith. It has made each mile costly, and now, with the ocean still all around, you feel the journey gathering itself toward land like a breath held too long. At first, America appears as rumour made visible, a smudge on the horizon, a dark line where sea and sky stop arguing and settle into land. People crowd the deck as if nearness might improve their eyesight. Necks stretch, hands shade brows, voices rise in quick bursts, then drop again. After so many days of water, the mere fact of something solid ahead feels nearly magical. Not beautiful at once, not grand in the way paintings prefer, but solid. That is enough to stir the heart. The morning air is cold and carries a damp metallic edge. Salt dries on your lips. Your fingers, wrapped around the rail, feel the splintered wood under a film of moisture. Sails shift overhead with a restless flap. Somewhere close by, a child laughs because everyone else is suddenly excited, and that seems reason enough. Another child cries because excitement and fear are siblings with similar voices. You stand among strangers who no longer feel entirely strange, all of you staring toward the same uncertain promise. The first sight is not always New York itself, and certainly not the city of easy legend. It may be the harbour approaches, smaller craft cutting across the water, low land emerging in pieces, masts thickening toward the distance, warehouses and shorelines taking shape slowly through haze. If you arrive by the Saint, Lawrence route to Canada, the scene differs. But for many Irish famine immigrants, the great magnetic image is New York, that busy Atlantic gateway where ships arrive thickly and hope goes ashore wearing poor boots. As the vessel draws nearer, details begin to sharpen. More ships than you thought possible. Brigs, schooners, packets, steamcraft, barges, ferries. Masts crowd the skyline like a leafless forest made by accountants and wind. Smoke trails from parts of the city. Bells carry faintly over the water. The harbour smells different from the open Atlantic, less clean, more human, tar, coal smoke, sewage, fish, wet wood, and industry. The scent is not elegant, but after weeks aboard, it smells like consequence. You might have imagined arrival as relief so total it would wash straight through the body. Instead, the feeling is mixed and jagged. Yes, there is amazement. Yes, there is gratitude that the ship has not swallowed you whole. But there is also dread, because the journey is clearly not over. Landfall does not place money in your pocket. It does not find your relatives. It does not keep officials from asking questions or prevent a swindler from reading your confusion like a map. America, in its first appearance, is less a welcome than a task. Passengers begin straightening clothing and gathering possessions long before anyone tells them to. Blankets are folded, bundles are retied, caps are adjusted, faces are washed with small amounts of treasured water or with spit and determination, the ancient cosmetics of the poor. A mother smooths a boy's hair with both palms. A man rubs grime from his shoes using a sleeve already too worn to suffer much dignity. It is impossible not to prepare for inspection, even if you do not know exactly whose inspection matters most. Conversation changes tone. During the crossing, talk could drift in circles full of weather, illness, memory, and complaint. Now it turns practical. Where will you go first? Who has an address? Which dock receives emigrants? How much does a cart cost? Which district holds Irish boarding houses? Does anyone know the way to Cherry Street, 5 Points, Brooklyn, or the waterfront labour markets? Names of places begin to fly around the deck like loose bits of paper, important and not yet meaningful. A scholarly uncertainty hangs over many emigrant stories at this point. Historians continue to argue about how prepared famine-era immigrants actually were for American city life. Some stress chain migration and the role of letters from kin, suggesting many arrived with at least a rough destination and a few useful expectations. Others emphasize how fragmentary those expectations could be, especially for the poorest passengers, whose understanding of urban America often came from second-hand rumor or years-old descriptions. Both possibilities feel present in the faces around you. Some look focused, others look as though the whole city may swallow them before noon. The harbour traffic grows louder, you hear shouted orders from other vessels, chains rattle, oars knock against hulls, gulls dive and screech overhead with the opportunism of creatures who understand ports better than priests do. Small boats pass close enough to see individual faces, workers and pilots with coats stiff from weather and habits shaped by tide tables rather than harvests. Their movements seem brisk, efficient, faintly impatient. You have come from a world where the land often set the pace. Here, commerce does. Then there is the skyline itself, such as it is in the mid-19th century. Not towering in the modern sense, not a forest of steel, but dense, vertical, and busy. Church spires, warehouses, rows of brick buildings, wharves stacked with goods, and streets packed behind them in layers you cannot yet decipher. The city looks built by people who mistrust emptiness. Everything appears crammed, useful, claimed. Even from the water, you sense that space will cost something. One curious tidbit from arrivals in this era is how often first impressions focused on noise rather than sight alone. Bells, hammering, wagon wheels, hawkers, ship calls, dockside arguments, and the endless percussive clatter of trade made American port cities seem startlingly loud to newcomers from rural districts. The modern city likes to think it invented noise. It did not. It merely added more engines. 19th century ports were already perfectly capable of shaking peace out of a person's skull. You study the faces of the crew as land nears. Sailors who seemed almost carved from rope and salt now move with extra urgency, preparing lines, shouting to one another, judging current and traffic. Their confidence reassures you only slightly. The ship slows, turns, approaches. Nearby passengers press too close to the rail, and someone tells them to move back before excitement tips into accident. A child is hoisted up for a better look. An old woman crosses herself again and again, each motion smaller than the last, as if prayer now has to squeeze through a crowded chest. There is no great ceremonial moment when the city announces your importance. That is the first honest lesson of arrival. America is busy. It has goods to move, ships to berth, accounts to tally, labour to squeeze, and streets to fill. Your story matters deeply to you and only incidentally to the harbour. This can feel cruel. It can also feel liberating. Indifference has a rough fairness to it. Nobody here has time to admire your suffering at length. As the vessel edges toward its landing place, the smell thickens. Mud from the shoreline mixes with coal smoke and the sourness of standing water trapped near docks. Horses somewhere on shore contribute their practical opinion. Men with hooks and ropes wait on the wharf. Porters size up luggage with the predatory accuracy of people who turn confusion into wages. You see crates, barrels, bales, and carts piled or moving in every direction. Goods are clearly fluent in this city. Human beings must learn. The moment of docking brings a strange silence inside you, though outside everything grows noisier. Ropes fly. Orders snap across the gap. Wood grinds against wood. The hull shudders lightly as contact is made. A cheer rises from some passengers, then breaks apart into laughter, tears, coughing, and sudden conversation. After weeks at sea, the ship is still moving a little underfoot, and your body no longer trusts stillness. Even with land beside you, balance feels borrowed. You look down at the wharf and see America not as an idea but as surfaces, wet planks, coils of rope, boots splashed with harbour muck, brown brick walls streaked by weather, signs painted in letters some can read and others cannot, hats of every shape. Faces of different complexions and dress, black workers, white labourers, merchants, sailors, women carrying baskets, officials with papers, boys darting where boys should probably not dart. The city is visibly mixed in a way many rural newcomers find striking. It is also visibly unequal. Wealth and want seem to pass each other in the same street without introduction. For Irish Catholics, religion remains a quiet compass even here. Some passengers scan instinctively for a church steeple, or ask at once where the nearest Catholic parish may be found. Not because they expect sanctuary to solve everything, but because churches hold information, language, community, and familiar ritual. In a foreign city, a parish can function as map, message board, and emotional oxygen. Among the poorest arrivals, those links can matter almost as much as money. Officials may board or inspect passengers depending on port practices and the year. Questions can be brief or probing. Who are you? Where are you going? Are you sick? Who will receive you? Can you support yourself? Such inquiries feel larger when answered in a tired body with a strange accent before strangers who control your immediate movement. The Atlantic crossing may be finished, but judgment has only changed uniforms. Some passengers carry letters tucked into linings, prayer books, or inner pockets, addresses written on scraps that have softened from repeated handling. These bits of paper suddenly become priceless. They are not simply directions. They are thin bridges between survival and bewilderment, an uncle on Mott Street, a cousin in Brooklyn Navy Yard, a sister employed as a servant uptown, a labour gang foreman rumoured to hire countrymen. Without such clues, the city can open before you like a maze built by rent collectors. The emotional weather on deck shifts by the minute. Relief flares, then worry snuffs it. Wonder returns, then shrinks before practical fear. One woman smiles at the sight of land and immediately begins crying. A young man grins as if he has won a race, then admits in the next breath that he has no clear notion where he will sleep. This blend of feeling is one of the truest parts of arrival. New worlds are rarely entered in one clean emotion. There is also the unsettling matter of appearance. After weeks at sea, many passengers look worn, thin, stained, and hollow-eyed. America sees you first in the costume of endurance. You may be judged by clothes faded from salt, by the smell of the voyage still clinging to wool, by the awkward way you step after so much time on shifting boards. Some observers on shore will see only poverty and foreignness. Others will see potential workers. A few will see kin. One suspects the gulls see only lunch. Another debate among historians concerns just how shocked Irish famine immigrants were by the scale and tempo of New York on first arrival. Memoirs written later often dramatize the contrast, while contemporary letters sometimes move quickly to practical matters such as boarding costs and work. Memory likes a dramatic skyline. Daily need likes the price of bread. Probably both reactions lived side by side, astonishment in the eyes and arithmetic in the head. When permission to disembark finally comes, the line forms with all the grace of a crowded pantry. People surge, halt, shuffle, adjust bundles, lift children, call names, and count belongings. The gangway that once led from quay to ship now leads from ordeal into uncertainty. Your hand closes around your bundle so tightly the knuckles ache, beneath your boots. The boards feel unsteady at first, not because they move, but because your body still expects them to. The first step onto American ground is oddly plain. No trumpet, no revelation, just the texture of planks or stone underfoot, firmer than a ship's deck and somehow unreal for that very reason. You breathe in and the city enters you at once. Smoke, salt, dung, mud, sweat, and hot food from somewhere tantalizingly close. Voices surround you in accents from Ireland, England, Germany, America, and places you cannot name. The dock thrums, carts creak past, someone shouts for a porter, someone else warns against one, and there, standing at the lip of the harbour world with your sea legs fading and your land fear rising, you understand the hidden truth of arrival. Reaching America is not the end of the hardship story or the beginning of triumph. It is the instant when survival stops being about storms and births and becomes about streets, wages, rooms, prejudice, and whether this enormous noisy city has any place at all for a tired Irish immigrant carrying nearly everything they own in one aching hand. You do not receive a soft landing. America greets you with elbows. The moment you move away from the wharf, the city closes around you in noise, damp air, and fast talk. Men call out offers before you even understand the streets. Porters lunge toward luggage. Cart drivers promise fair prices in tones that suggest fairness has never once visited their souls. Boys dart through the crowd like fish in a current, quick enough to vanish with anything not tied down. The ground beneath your boots is solid, yet everything else feels unstable. The dockside streets are crowded with wagons, drays, handcarts, barrels, crates, and bodies moving in conflicting directions. Mud mixes with manure. Rainwater sits in ruts. Horses stamp and snort, their harnesses creaking as drivers curse and yank reins. The air is thick with coal smoke, fish, sweat, wet timber, sewage, and the warm smell of bread drifting from somewhere maddeningly near but not necessarily affordable. America, it turns out, has a smell. It is less liberty, more damp commerce. You walk with the stiff gait of someone whose body still belongs partly to the sea. Your legs do not entirely trust the ground. Your clothes still carry salt, ship stink, and the close company of too many strangers. This marks you at once. Experienced city eyes can read a newly arrived immigrant from 20 paces away. The bundle, the confusion, the pause at each corner, the way you look up at signs and back down at your scrap of paper. You're visible in the worst possible sense. That visibility invites the first wave of trouble. Runners, boarding house agents, port hustlers, and common thieves work these districts with the patience of men harvesting a dependable crop. Some claim they know your cousin. Some say your address is impossible to reach without their guidance. Some offer to carry your things for a small fee, then demand a much larger one after moving 10 yards. Some steer immigrants toward overpriced or filthy lodgings in exchange for a cut. A practiced liar can sound like a concerned uncle within seconds. In a strange city, kindness itself becomes suspicious. For many arrivals, Castle Garden will later become the famous immigrant reception centre in New York, but that is still in the future. In the mid-1840s, before that system takes shape, the process is rougher and less protected. Newcomers often step straight into the private marketplace of lodging, transport, labour promises, and dockside tricks. Historians still disagree about exactly how widespread the worst frauds were in the earliest famine years compared with later remembered accounts. But even a modest amount of cheating feels enormous when it targets people with almost nothing to lose. You clutch your address if you have one, a folded letter, a name, a street, perhaps only a parish and a rumour. If you have no address, the streets look wider and more hostile at once. The city presents itself not as a picture but as a puzzle. Brick rows, narrow lanes, storefronts, taverns, cellars, alleys, signs painted in strong letters, windows crowded with goods. Everywhere things are for sale. Somewhere, you suspect, so are people. Just under a more respectable name. The Irish accent around you is both comfort and trap. You hear familiar rhythms on corners, from carters, labourers, women leaning from windows, and dock workers hauling freight. This can guide you toward safer ground. It can also guide you toward those who understand exactly how to exploit your trust. A countryman may help you find a bed. Another may sell you a bedbug collection generously included with the mattress. Shared nationality is not a sacrament. It is merely a starting point. Boarding houses loom large in these first hours. Some are honest enough, offering cramped rooms, poor food, and too many people, but at least providing shelter and news. Others are dirty, overpriced pits where the straw smells sour and the blankets seem already inhabited by creatures with firm opinions. You climb narrow stairs in buildings heavy with dampness and cooked cabbage, old smoke, spilled ale, and human fatigue. In the hallway, floorboards sag. A baby wails behind one door. Through another comes coughing so deep it sounds quarried from stone. The keeper eyes you and your bundle in one sweep. Price first. Payment now, perhaps in advance. The room, when shown, is scarcely a room, a bed, maybe two, a washstand if fortune is feeling theatrical, a small window with grudging light, wallpaper stained by age or absent entirely. You press a hand to the coverlet and feel rough cloth and hidden grit. Sleep here will not be elegant, but it will be horizontal. Standards fall fast when the alternative is the street. Not every arrival goes straight to a boarding house. Some are met by kin who have already planted themselves in the city Irish quarters. That reunion can feel like rescue. A sister appears at the dock in a borrowed shawl, thinner than remembered but unmistakable. A cousin waves from beside a cart. An uncle who once wrote confident letters now looks tired and older, yet his voice has the authority of someone who knows where to turn next. Family changes the first day completely. With kin, the city becomes difficult. Without them, it can feel predatory. The prejudice begins early too, sometimes as muttering, sometimes as performance. Not every American greets the Irish with contempt, but plenty do. Especially in the growing urban world where competition for jobs, housing, and public relief breeds resentment, you hear the words before you fully understand their local flavour. Drunk, dirty, papist, paddy, ignorant, too many children, too much loyalty to priests, too little discipline. The insults are repetitive, which is one of the duller qualities of prejudice. Bigotry rarely troubles itself to be original. Nativist feeling in the United States is already hardening during these years, especially against Catholic immigrants. Many native-born Protestants fear that Irish arrivals will crowd the labour market, burden poor relief, alter politics, and obey Rome more readily than Republican law. It is a convenient collection of anxieties, large enough to justify cruelty and vague enough to survive evidence. Some historians argue that anti-Irish hostility intensified noticeably with the famine influx because the newcomers were poorer and more visibly desperate than earlier migrants. That seems entirely plausible. Poverty has a way of offending people who like to imagine success as purely moral. You feel the hostility in looks as much as words. The pause when you speak and the curled lip at your clothes, the way a shopkeeper watches your hands, the way one passerby steps aside not from politeness, but from distaste. Such moments do not break the body, but they wear the nerves. It is exhausting to realize that the city has begun judging you before you have even found your supper, and yet the city is not one emotion. That is what makes it so hard to read. Alongside contempt, there is indifference. Alongside indifference, there is opportunity. A tavern keeper may insult the Irish and still hire one to scrub floors, A grocer may grumble about foreigners while selling on credit to a woman with the right parish connection. A Protestant missionary may offer tracts and soup with motives mixed between pity and zeal. A Catholic priest may direct newcomers to lodgings, work leads, and families willing to share information. The city can wound and sustain in the same hour. One curious tidbit from New York life in this era is the importance of oyster cellars and street oyster stands. Oysters were far cheaper and more common than many modern people imagine, eaten by rich and poor alike in staggering quantities. For immigrants, the smell of frying oysters drifting from a stall could signal an unfamiliar kind of urban abundance. Not all abundance was evenly distributed, of course. Cities are very generous with aromas and more selective with portions. You move deeper into neighborhoods where the buildings crowd more tightly and the streets narrow into a world of hanging laundry, street sellers, barefoot children, stray dogs, and women talking from stoops. In Lower Manhattan, especially in districts that will become heavily associated with immigrant poverty, density presses itself into every surface. Windows are closed, voices carry, garbage accumulates, water stands where it should not. Yet life is immediate here. News travels quickly. So does gossip, which is simply news wearing a more entertaining coat. The famous 5 Points district acquires a fearsome reputation in American writing, and not without basis. Overcrowding, vice, crime, poor sanitation, and deep poverty all flourish there. Still, scholars have long argued about how much reformers and journalists exaggerated its darkness for moral theatre. The neighbourhood was harsh, certainly, but also full of actual families building actual routines. Not merely extras in a cautionary play, poor districts are often described by outsiders as if nobody inside them ever cooked, laughed, prayed, flirted, sang, or borrowed salt. Inconveniently for moral panic, they usually did all of those things. If you enter such a district on your first day, the senses take over. Wash water splashing into gutters, the sharp, sour smell of beer from a nearby grog shop, onion, frying fat, damp brick, horse dung, smoke, babies crying through open windows, a fiddler somewhere upstairs, the slap of cards on a tavern table, someone shouting in Irish, someone shouting back in English. A door bangs. A woman drags a child indoors by one arm while carrying bread in the other. Life here is not hidden, it spills. Money dictates nearly every decision. How much for a bed? How much for bread? Whether to pay for a meal or keep the coins for tomorrow? Whether to trust a man offering work that begins before dawn? Whether to buy a comb, a candle, a bit of soap, or none of the above because hunger has a louder voice. Newly arrived immigrants often possess only a tiny reserve after passage, and that reserve can vanish with alarming speed. A city eats money faster than the countryside because it monetizes things that village life sometimes allowed you to improvise. Women travelling alone or with children face additional dangers. Boarding house respectability matters. The wrong street after dark matters. The reputation of a house matters. A widow, servant girl, or mother with little cash must judge character quickly in a world where every judgment carries risk. Some find protection through kin networks, parish contacts, or employers seeking domestic servants. Others face harsher choices. The city offers labour, yes, but not always safely, and not always on terms a newcomer can control. Men seeking immediate work are often directed toward the docks, digging crews, street cleaning, hauling, or any task where a strong back is welcome and a damaged one easily replaced. But on the first day, promises often outnumber jobs. A tavern corner may hold 10 men discussing 20 opportunities, most of them evaporating by morning. You learn to listen hard and believe carefully. Religion again becomes practical. Catholic parishes and clergy are not merely spiritual centres. They help orient the newcomer socially. Which district has more Irish families? Which widow takes boarders? Which employer is decent enough? Which street to avoid? Which charity has bread? In an alien city, a church can function like a nervous system for a scattered people. By evening, the first day's excitement has curdled into fatigue. Your shoulders ache from carrying your life. Your eyes sting from smoke and sleeplessness. The room you finally enter, whether kin's apartment or a rented bed, feels both sanctuary and surrender. You sit on a chair that wobbles or on the edge of a mattress stuffed past dignity with straw. The sounds of the street keep rising through the wall. Wheels, voices, drunken singing. A baby somewhere nearby refusing sleep on principle. You remove your shoes and feel the soreness of your feet pulse upward. Supper. If there is supper, tastes sharper because you are indoors and alive. Bread, tea, perhaps stew thin enough to show the spoon its reflection. Maybe potatoes again, because the old world has followed you more faithfully than expected. Hunger does not care whether the nation has changed. It recognizes only the bowl. You eat with the concentration of the nearly spent. And in that dim room, with the smell of damp plaster, old bedding, and cabbage resting in the corners, the truth of America settles over you. The ocean did not deliver you into comfort. It delivered you into competition, into crowds, into landlords, boarding house keepers, insults, bargains, parish gossip, and the thin line between help and exploitation. Yet there is one stubborn relief. However rough the welcome, you are ashore. The city may sneer, cheat, overcharge, and shove, but it is also a place where tomorrow exists, and in the first bruising hours after arrival, that possibility is enough to keep your tired eyes open a little longer. Morning in the city begins before you are ready for it. Wheels grind over stones outside. A cart rattles past. Someone shouts in a yard below. A woman in the next room coughs with such determination that the wall itself seems to vibrate. The air smells of damp plaster, yesterday's smoke, cabbage boiled into surrender, and the faint sourness of too many sleepers in too little space. You wake with the odd heaviness of a person who crossed an ocean, only to discover that standing still can be just as tiring. Now comes the plainest question of all. How do you earn money before the last coins vanish? For poor Irish immigrants in the mid-1840s, work is rarely a grand search for fulfillment. Nobody is strolling through Manhattan looking for a calling. You are looking for wages, any wages, enough to pay for a bed, food, and perhaps a bit set aside for kin, rent, or sheer panic. The search begins with shoes on the street and ears open. Information matters almost as much as strength. Who is hiring? Which pier needs unloaders? Which contractor is digging a trench? Which household wants a scullion? A laundress just or a servant girl? Which foreman pays on Saturday? Which one disappears on Friday? You dress as neatly as circumstances permit. A collar straightened, hair smoothed, coat brushed with the hand, boots checked for disaster. It is not vanity, it is strategy. Employers read appearance quickly, even when they pretend to be interested only in labour. A cleaner cap can suggest steadiness. A washed face can suggest discipline. Of course, washing a face in a boarding house basin shared by half a floor is its own little athletic event. Outside, the streets are already busy with market wagons, labourers, apprentices, women carrying baskets, children sent on errands, and men lingering on corners where hiring rumours tend to collect. The city smells different in the morning, colder, sharper. Bakeries send out a warm, yeasty breath. Coal smoke begins to rise again. Horse dung is newly distributed, which is one of the less poetic signs of urban renewal. Fish carts add their opinion. So do gutters. Men seeking labour often head first to the docks. The waterfront is a rough marketplace of muscle. Ships need cargo moved. Warehouses need bales shifted. Barrels must be rolled. Crates stacked. Ropes hauled. Holds emptied. The work is heavy, dirty, and uncertain. But it is immediate in a way more respectable employment is not. You stand among other men waiting to be chosen by a foreman who looks over the crowd, as if selecting tools rather than people. Broad shoulders help. So does already knowing somebody. Connections can matter as much as strength, which is annoying but timeless. When the call comes, it is brisk. Not you. Move along. Next lot. Rejection takes seconds. So does hiring. If chosen, you follow fast, because hesitation can lose a place to the man behind you. The dock planks are slick in spots. Ropes scrape the palms. Coarse fibres bite into skin already roughened by farm work. A barrel presses hard against the shoulder. Crates bruise the thigh. Salt, tar, and sweat combine into a smell that clings even after washing. By noon, your back knows exactly where it is. For others, work lies inland in construction and street labour. American cities are expanding, digging, paving, building, repairing, forever clawing themselves into larger versions of their own ambition. Irish labourers become strongly associated with this rough urban growth. They dig foundations, level roads, haul stone, carry bricks, clear rubbish, and do the sort of physical tasks respectable society depends upon while pretending not to notice. The pay is low, the hours are long. The foreman may curse in a way that suggests creativity is alive and well in America. Still, coin at week's end can make even a shouted insult sound temporarily bearable. There is a frequent claim, repeated in later memory, that signs reading "No Irish Need Apply" blocked Irish workers from many jobs. Historians still argue over how widespread such signs actually were in the 1840s and 1850s, especially compared with how powerfully the phrase lived in immigrant memory. Some scholars suggest the exclusion was real, but not always posted so neatly on public signs. Others argue that printed examples were fewer than later legend implied. What is beyond debate is that many Irish immigrants encountered hiring bias, social contempt, and assumptions about drunkenness, ignorance, and Catholic disloyalty. Bigotry does not require good typography to do damage. Even when a job is secured, the terms can be slippery. Day labour may last only a day. Weather can halt work. A contractor can vanish, delay payment, or claim the task was poorly done. Injury is a constant threat. A slipped load, a crushed hand, a fall from scaffolding, a wagon wheel at the wrong angle. There is little cushion against bad luck. A body is your capital, and the city spends it briskly. Women face a different labour market, though not an easier one. Domestic service is among the most common occupations open to Irish immigrant women in urban America. Households need cooks, maids, laundresses, nursemaids, and cleaners. Service offers wages, board, and a degree of security compared with the street. It also brings long hours, strict supervision, heavy work, and the peculiar humiliation of being necessary while treated as inferior. An Irish servant girl may rise before the family and sleep after them, hands red from wash water, clothes smelling of soap, starch, grease, and kitchen heat. Yet domestic service can also provide entry into stable routines and parish networks that help a newcomer endure. You hear of jobs through kin, through parish contacts, through boarding house gossip, through men in taverns, through women at pumps, through chance conversation in bakery lines. Cities are loud, but labour news travels in a strangely intimate way. Someone's cousin knows a mason. Someone's landlady heard of a widow seeking a girl for housework. Someone's brother left a gang digging north of town because the pay was poor but the foreman is still hiring. All useful information arrives wrapped in opinion. You learn to sort rumour from opportunity with the speed of a gambler and the caution of a widow. A quirky little detail of labouring life in this era is how often workers judged a job by the quality of the midday meal as much as by the wage itself. Bread, pork, tea, stew, or the lack of them could make men rank employers with fierce seriousness. A contractor who paid modestly but allowed decent meal breaks might earn reluctant loyalty. Another who worked men hard on thin food was cursed with almost theological force. Hunger sharpens economic theory very quickly. The touch of the work stays with you. Blisters rise, burst, then harden. Lime burns the skin. Splinters bury themselves in the fingers. Rope leaves red grooves across the palm. A shovel handle smooth from long use warms under your grip. Sweat dries in the shirt, then chills when wind finds it. Muscles ache in unfamiliar layers. Farm labour has prepared many immigrants for effort, but city labour has its own rhythm, less tied to seasons, more tied to clocks, foremen, traffic, deliveries, and relentless repetition. At hiring points, the crowd itself becomes part of the experience. Men stamp their feet in the cold waiting to be picked. Voices compete. Jokes flicker. Tension moves through the group whenever a boss approaches. Germans stand beside Irishmen, native-born labourers beside recent arrivals, all measuring each other's chances. Competition does not make friendship impossible, but it complicates it. The poor are often invited to quarrel among themselves while better-dressed men profit from the arrangement. A very old trick. Still effective, taverns play a practical role in this world beyond drink. They serve as informal labour exchanges, message boards, union of rumour, and shelter from weather. A man may buy the cheapest mug he can justify and listen for news of work. Names are mentioned, contractors criticised, wages compared. A hiring lead can spread across a room in minutes. Of course, taverns also swallow wages that should go elsewhere, and anti-Irish stereotypes about drink do not emerge from pure invention. Yet the truth is more complicated than caricature. Taverns are social infrastructure in neighbourhoods where privacy is scarce and information is precious. For many Irish men, the first steady jobs may come through dangerous public works projects, canal digging, road grading, railroad building beyond the city, sewer excavation, and other brutal tasks absorb immigrant labour in large numbers. In the city itself, street cleaning and carting can provide a foothold. These jobs are physically punishing and socially low status, but they connect workers to political networks, ward bosses, and other countrymen. Wages may be meagre, yet regularity has its own dignity. There is also the humiliation of having skills that do not travel cleanly. A man who knew farming, hedging, turf cutting, or local craft work in Ireland may find that such experience translates only partially into the urban American market. He is not unskilled in any meaningful human sense. He simply lacks the right city-recognised skill at the right moment. Migration can make a competent person feel useless by changing the rules around them. Children work too, in ways both visible and hidden. They run errands, carry goods, mind younger siblings while mothers labour, pick over scraps, sell small items in the street, or contribute in boarding houses and workshops. Childhood among the poor is not exactly devoted to piano lessons and moral improvement. It is functional. Yet children also play between tasks with an energy that borders on defiance. A hoop rolling down an alley, chalk marks on a step, shouting games in a yard where laundry flaps overhead. Play survives because children smuggle life into hard places. In better moments, the first earned wages feel almost miraculous. Coins in the palm, warm from your hand, real, countable, earned on this side of the ocean. The amount may be disappointing, but it is money that did not exist in your pocket that morning. You think at once of rent, food, and the next day's needs. You may also think of sending some home one day, or helping a brother, or saving for a better room with an actual window that opens. Human beings are reckless enough to dream even while counting pennies, yet labour does not grant acceptance. Many employers want Irish workers precisely because they can be paid little and pushed hard. Need creates demand without respect. You may be welcomed as a back, not as a neighbour. The distinction becomes clear quickly. A boss who hires you may still mock your accent. A family that trusts an Irish girl with its children may still sneer at her faith. A city can depend on immigrant hands while insulting the people attached to them. This contradiction sits at the centre of urban growth. By late afternoon, the body begins to drag, legs feel heavier, shoulders throb, dust settles into the mouth, sweat cools and leaves salt at the collar. The streets home, if home is the word, seem longer than they did in the morning. Still, there is a particular satisfaction in walking back with the fatigue of paid work rather than the panic of idleness. Even a brutal day can steady the mind if it promises bread. The boarding house or crowded room receives you again with its stew of smells and sounds. Cooking, wet boots by the door, someone mending by dim light, someone washing socks, someone grumbling about a foreman who thinks men are made of hinges. Stories of the day pass around. Who was cheated? Who found a place for tomorrow? Which mistress is impossible? Which dock gang pays badly? Where more workers may be wanted at dawn? The room becomes a council chamber of sore muscles and practical intelligence. Supper tastes better when bought by labour, though not necessarily by much. Tea, bread. Perhaps bacon grease stretched heroically over potatoes or cabbage. The table, if there is one, rocks slightly. Tin spoons click. Steam fogs the nearby window. Hands, scraped and reddened, curl around hot cups with gratitude deeper than elegance. Nobody here is confusing this meal with luxury. That would be too ambitious, but it is enough, tonight, to soften the edge of fear. And that is the first real shape of work in immigrant America. Not the shining ladder of legend, nor the total despair of those who hate the newcomer, but a narrow, punishing path of wages wrestled from a city that needs labour more than it offers kindness. You rise early, you search hard, you carry, scrub, dig, haul, lift, wash, and endure. Bit by bit, the streets that first threaten to swallow you begin to reveal where money can be found, where it leaks away, and how a tired Irish immigrant might keep body and hope together for one more day. For many Irish immigrant women, the city first opens not through streets or docks, but through another person's front door. You arrive with a small bundle, a parish reference if you're lucky, and the knowledge that respectable work is often found in kitchens, washrooms, nurseries, and stairwells where wealthy families prefer not to look too closely. Domestic service becomes one of the most common paths open to you. It promises wages, meals, a bed, and some shield against the rawest forms of city danger. It also asks for nearly everything else. The house itself may seem astonishing at first, not always grand in the palace sense, but solid, ordered, and full of objects that declare money without needing to raise their voice. Carpets soften the floor, curtains hold back drafts, silver glints from sideboards, clocks tick with superior confidence. Bedrooms multiply in a way that feels almost moralizing. One family, so many rooms. You can scrub the steps and still think that arithmetic is rude. Your work begins early, very early, long before the household sits to breakfast. You're already up in the dim chill of morning, feeling around for a dress or apron in a servant's room where the air smells faintly of soap, damp wool, and stale candle wax. Floors must be swept, fires laid, ashes emptied, water carried, grates blacked, pots cleaned, bread prepared or fetched, bedrooms aired, children washed, coaxed, dressed, chased, and rescued from their own socks. The labour never quite stops. It only changes shape. Service is work of the hands, the back, the knees, the lungs. You scrub until your knuckles sting. You wring linen in cold water that reddens the skin. You bend over steaming pots while grease and heat settle on your face. Soap bites at cuts. Starch dries your fingers. Your shoes slide on kitchen flags worn smooth by years of previous women doing the same tasks. The house may look calm to those who live upstairs. Downstairs, it runs on constant invisible effort. Irish women become strongly associated with domestic service in American cities during the 19th century, and employers often seek them in large numbers. Partly this is because immigrant women need work. Partly it is because domestic labour is difficult, physically heavy, and not especially prized by native-born women with other options. Irish servants develop a reputation in American culture that is both useful and unfair. They are seen as sturdy, Catholic, outspoken, loyal, clumsy, amusing, unruly, hard-working, and hopelessly provincial. Often all at once, depending on who is doing the describing. When a society needs your labour badly, it tends to invent a mythology about your flaws so it can feel better about the arrangement. Some employers are stern but decent. They care about punctuality, honesty, and polished boots on the right child. They may provide fair meals, regular pay, and a measure of stability. Others are petty tyrants with bells, opinions, and a mysterious inability to carry their own teacup 3 feet. The mistress of the house might inspect dust as if it were a moral failure. She may correct your speech. She may complain that your ironing lacks refinement. Your footsteps are too loud, your tea too weak, your prayers too Roman, your face too solemn, your laugh too free. In service, character is judged by those with the leisure to invent new standards every Thursday. Religion complicates matters. Many Irish immigrant women are Catholic, while many employers are Protestant. That difference can remain polite, tense, or openly hostile. A servant may need permission to attend Mass, and permission can be granted grudgingly. Some employers fear priests, some fear Catholic influence over children. Some tolerate your faith so long as it stays quiet and preferably invisible. Others try to press tracts into your hand, confident that a pamphlet and a stern smile will undo centuries of belief. Conversion efforts toward Irish servant girls are common enough to be noticed and resented. Faith, in this setting, is not only spiritual, it is tied to dignity, memory, and refusal. A curious tidbit from the world of domestic service is the repeated employer complaint that Irish maids would answer back. This appears in letters, household advice, and comic writing with almost comic regularity. One person's insolence is another person's self-respect wearing an apron. To be fair, after carrying coal, hauling water, lifting toddlers, and being scolded about teaspoons, you might answer back too. Life in service can be lonely. You live inside a household without belonging to it. You hear family laughter through doors where you are not invited to sit. You know who quarrels with whom, which child lies, which uncle drinks too much, and which guest leaves muddy boots in the hall. Yet your own story remains largely irrelevant to the house's official life. Meals are taken separately, rooms are smaller, time is not your own. Even your body belongs partly to the rhythm of someone else's bell. Still, domestic service can offer something precious in the early immigrant years. Cash wages paid with regularity, board included, a place to sleep where the roof is less likely to drip onto your face, opportunities to meet other servants at market, on errands, or at Sunday Mass, contact with parish networks, information, employers who may recommend you onward. A young woman alone in the city may prefer the discipline of service to the uncertainties of street labour, or the dangers of unsupported lodging. Constraint can feel like safety when the alternative is chaos. Laundry is among the harshest forms of women's labour, whether done inside a household or for pay outside it. Wash day is a physical trial disguised as domestic routine. Water must be heated, lifted, poured, and replaced. Clothes are soaked, scrubbed, beaten, wrung, boiled, rinsed, and hung. Steam fills the room and settles into the hair. Soap slicks the arms. Lines sag under wet fabric. Fingers prune and crack. The smell is a mixture of lye, wet cotton, sweat, and heat. When people speak fondly of clean linen, they rarely mention the woman who wrestled it into existence. Not all Irish immigrant women go into service. Some take in washing, some sew, some sell food, some keep small boarding houses or work within family economies where every member contributes in overlapping ways. Widows may patch together survival through lodging, laundry, and parish charity. Married women often labour invisibly beside husbands, stretching food, minding children, taking in piecework, and making a few coins perform the duties of many. The line between housework and income earning is often thin among the poor. A pot on the stove may feed your family, boarders, or both. Marriage patterns among Irish immigrants are shaped by all this labour. Young women earning wages in service can delay marriage slightly, save small amounts, help relatives, or build independence rare in some rural settings. Historians continue to debate how much migration altered gender expectations for Irish women in America, whether wage earning outside the family strengthened autonomy, or simply changed the site of dependence from father to employer to husband. The answer likely varied from woman to woman, as real life usually does when scholars most wish it would behave neatly. Social life survives despite the workload. Sunday matters. So do feast days, parish events, dances, wakes, and visits squeezed into rare free hours. A servant girl may spend all week in a household that treats her as useful furniture, then step into church on Sunday and stand among others who know her name, county, family, and worth. The shift can be emotional as much as social. At Mass, the smells of candle wax, damp coats, incense, and polished wood mix with whispered greetings and the rustle of familiar devotion. For an hour, perhaps two, the city feels arranged around something other than service. Friendships among women become practical lifelines. One girl knows a better employer, another lends a shawl, another explains which shop offers credit and which pawnbroker cheats. Older women advise younger ones about wages, reputations, and how not to be cornered by a man who mistakes need for invitation. Gossip circulates with astonishing speed, but gossip is also data in poor communities. Who is decent? Who is dangerous? Who is in trouble? Who needs help? Behind the laughter and eye-rolling, there is a functioning system of mutual warning. Respectability weighs heavily on immigrant women. Reputation can affect employment, marriage prospects, rooming options, and parish standing. A woman alone must navigate a city eager to judge her and often eager to use her. Employers scrutinize conduct. Neighbors watch comings and goings. Priests advise modesty with varying degrees of delicacy. Yet women are not merely passive under this gaze. They manage impressions, form alliances, protect one another, and sometimes quietly ignore rules that make survival harder. Moral expectations are strict. Rent is stricter. Children are woven through all of this. Irish immigrant women care for their own, their employers' children, siblings' children, neighbours' children, and anyone temporarily deposited in their orbit. Childcare is not an optional side task. It is part of the social fabric of poor neighbourhoods and service households alike. A girl barely out of childhood herself may find a baby on her hip before breakfast. A widow may take in another woman's child for the afternoon while washing dries and errands are run. Care is labour. It is also how communities remain communities instead of collapsing into separate, hungry rooms. Some American observers develop a stock character called Bridget, a comic Irish servant girl who is noisy, foolish, and forever dropping plates. This stereotype spreads in jokes, theatre, and household talk. It is patronising, often hostile, and occasionally revealing. Stereotypes appear where one group relies daily on another group it does not wish to treat as equal. The joke does social work. It shrinks the maid so the mistress can feel larger. Sadly, human beings are quite talented at this. Even within hard circumstances, women create moments of texture and grace. Hair brushed by a window before church, a ribbon saved from wages, tea shared in a kitchen after the family has gone out, laughter over an employer's impossible standards, bread and butter eaten slowly on a day off in the company of a friend from the same county. These are small scenes. They matter because small scenes are what most lives are actually made of. You also see grief in quieter forms. A letter from home folded until the paper softens. News of sickness in Ireland received too late to act upon. A newborn buried after a brief life. A husband injured and suddenly unable to work. A position lost. A reference withheld. Tears wiped quickly because laundry still waits. Women's sorrow in immigrant history often arrives dressed in practical clothes, carrying a bucket. Evening in a servant's room or a tenement kitchen has its own atmosphere. Candlelight softens the roughest walls. The smell of tea, starch, and supper settles low. Feet ache in side-worn shoes. Hands pulse from work. Outside, carts and voices diminish little by little. Inside, a woman removes pins from her hair, folds an apron, rubs her wrists, and measures the next day before she sleeps. Fatigue can be deep enough to feel almost holy. That is the reality hidden beneath the smoother myths. Irish immigrant women do not merely accompany migration, they anchor it, finance it, soften it, and survive it through labour that is intimate, exhausting, and often underestimated. They scrub strangers' floors, rear children, stretch meals, carry faith into hostile households, protect their names, trade information, and hold together bits of ordinary life where very little is ordinary. The city may see only a maid, a washerwoman, a widow, a girl with an accent and red hands, but beneath that narrow view stands a figure of remarkable endurance, moving through kitchens and staircases with the quiet force of someone building a future one bucket, one prayer and one hard-earned wage at a time. Home, in the immigrant city, is rarely a peaceful noun. It is more often a negotiation, a room rented by the week, a corner of a larger room divided by a hanging sheet, a bed shared in shifts by those whose work hours do not match, a building full of footsteps, crying children, frying onions, prayers, coughing, gossip, arguments, and the constant scrape of survival against brick. Yet this is where life settles, not elegantly, but firmly enough to continue. You step into the tenement stairwell and the air changes at once. Outside there is street mud, horse traffic, and market smell. Inside there is damp plaster, old smoke, boiled cabbage, lamp oil, wet wool, and humanity in concentrated form. The boards underfoot creak with a weary honesty. Walls hold stains from years of hands, leaks, and bad air. Light enters reluctantly through a grimy window or an open door at the bottom of the stairs. Privacy is thin here. Sound is not. Many Irish immigrants in American cities end up in overcrowded housing because it is what their wages can reach. In Lower Manhattan and other urban districts, buildings originally designed for single families are often subdivided into multiple cramped units, while purpose-built tenements multiply as population pressure rises. Rooms are small, ventilation is poor, water access is limited, outdoor privies serve too many people, waste, illness, and crowding become ordinary companions. Reformers later describe these places with horror, and often with reason. Still, the people inside them are not merely victims in a report. They are tenants, parents, lodgers, cooks, workers, singers, mourners, and neighbours. The room itself might contain a stove if fortune has been especially generous, or access to one shared with others if fortune has been in one of its playful moods. A bed or two dominate the space. Trunks line a wall, a table, perhaps uneven. Chairs that do not match and scarcely need to. Hooks for clothes, a shelf for crockery, a holy image or crucifix near the bed, maybe a sprig of greenery in better months, maybe a bit of newspaper pasted over a draft. The poor decorate differently, but they do decorate. Even a room that smells of steam and coal can hold pride. What makes such places livable is not size. It is relationship. A sister who takes in her brother after work. A widow who rents half a bed to a girl from the same county. Cousins pooling wages. Boarders who are not kin but become close enough to quarrel like family. Irish immigrant housing often depends on webs of connection, county loyalties, parish ties, and the practical habit of making room where reason says no room remains. Human beings can fit a remarkable amount of attachment into a terrible floor plan. Cooking transforms the space. Toward evening, the building fills with the smell of supper from a dozen rooms at once. Potatoes, tea, bacon fat, onions, cabbage, broth, bread warming by the fire. Sometimes stew rich enough to feel festive, sometimes only enough to quiet the stomach. Lids rattle, spoons knock against bowls. Steam fogs the window. Children drift toward the scent with grave concentration. Food in immigrant neighbourhoods is often plain, but plain food eaten together acquires a kind of ceremony. Hunger lends it importance. Company lends it warmth. The sounds of the tenement are their own weather. Footsteps overhead. A baby fussing through the wall. A kettle starting to hum. A couple arguing in low. Clipped tones meant not to carry and therefore carrying perfectly. Laughter rising from the room downstairs. Somebody practicing a fiddle badly, then much better. A burst of song from men returning late. The slap of cards on a table. A pan dropped with a force suggesting not clumsiness but opinion. In buildings like these, silence is rare enough to seem suspicious. Catholic faith threads through daily life in ways both formal and intimate. The parish church may be the spiritual centre of the neighbourhood, but religion also lives in the room itself. A candle before an image, a whispered prayer at the bedside, grace muttered over tea and bread, rosary beads hanging from a nail, a child taught to cross themselves before sleep, while traffic and shouting continue outside the window. For many Irish immigrants, faith is not an ornament added to community. It is part of the structure that holds community together. The church offers more than Mass. It offers recognition. Baptisms, marriages, funerals, confessions, feast days, confraternities, charitable aid, and news all circulate through parish life. Priests and parish women may help newcomers find lodging, locate relatives, or secure a bit of relief. Children begin to absorb the habits and sounds of Catholic urban life, even as Protestant America often views that life with suspicion. The smell of incense, damp coats, polished wood, and candle wax in a crowded church can feel like a pocket of steadiness inside the restless city. Historians still argue about how unified Irish immigrant neighbourhoods truly were in these early years. Some emphasise strong solidarity rooted in shared faith, language patterns, county identities, and common hardship. Others point out tensions within Irish communities, including conflicts of region, class, politics, and personal reputation. Both are clearly true. A neighbourhood can support you, judge you, rescue you, and exhaust you all in the same week. Community is not the opposite of conflict. It is usually where conflict learns everyone's first name. Children fill these neighbourhoods with motion. They race through alleys, play on stoops, run errands for mothers, carry coal as mine babies, and absorb English street slang with terrifying speed. Their shoes, when they have them, slap over stones and boards. Their voices echo in yards where laundry lines cross above like low flags of domestic battle. A game can spring up in a filthy corner and feel perfectly cheerful. Children are excellent at accepting the environment and then ignoring its logic. Schooling exists, though unevenly. Some children attend public schools. Others enter Catholic schools as parish structures strengthen. Some drift in and out depending on wages, family need, or the quality of shoes. The question of education matters deeply because it touches identity, religion, and advancement all at once. A child who learns to read well may navigate the city better than their parents ever could. A child taught outside the faith may frighten those who see Protestant influence in the curriculum. Even the schoolroom becomes a frontier. One quirky detail from crowded immigrant housing is the importance of windows. Even bad ones. A room with a window, however drafty or begrimed, can command fierce preference because it offers light, air, and a route for sound and smell to escape. In buildings where fresh air is scarce, people discuss windows the way aristocrats discuss estates. That one catches a breeze, that one leaks, that one faces a wall so close you could shake hands with despair. Urban luxury is often just ventilation wearing a modest coat. Water is a daily trouble. A pump in the yard, a hydrant nearby, buckets carried upstairs, queues at certain hours, spills, arguments, children sent to fetch water returning soaked or distracted. Cleanliness depends not merely on moral effort but on access, time, and fuel. This is an important truth often missed by genteel critics. It is easy to praise hygiene from a house with a pump, servants, and dry floors. It is harder when every bucket has to be hauled through a stairwell that smells of onions and old boots. Sickness moves easily in such conditions. Fever, coughs, stomach illness, childhood infections. When one room holds many bodies and air hardly circulates, disease needs little imagination. A sick child changes the whole building's mood. Doors open quietly. Women carry broth, cloths, advice, and rumour. Men tread more softly on the stairs, at least for a day or two. Death, when it comes, is not hidden away neatly. It enters rooms where people have just eaten supper and sat by the fire. The closeness of tenement life makes grief public, but it also means mourning is rarely borne alone. Wake traditions and funeral customs remain important among Irish Catholics. Even in immigrant poverty, neighbours gather, candles burn, prayers are said, tea is poured, stories are told in voices that move between sorrow and humour with surprising grace. Outsiders sometimes misunderstand this mixture, but the poor have long known that grief and laughter are not enemies. They are often the only pair willing to sit through the night together. Women make neighbourhoods function in 1,000 unnoticed ways. They exchange news at pumps and doorways, lend food, watch children, share advice on landlords, employers, and credit. A woman standing on a stoop with flour on her hands may know more about the true state of the block than any official. Men may dominate the public world of labour gangs and ward politics, but the daily intelligence network of the neighbourhood often runs through women who notice everything and forget almost nothing. Credit binds the local economy. The grocer extends a little trust. The butcher waits until Saturday. The coalman grumbles but returns. Debts are small and constant. Reputation matters. A family known to pay when able may survive a hard week. A family already drowning may find doors closing. Money is always tight. But cash is not the only currency. Reliability, parish ties, kin recommendations, and mutual obligation all help people bridge the gap between wages and need. The neighbourhood also shapes identity in subtler ways. County accents mingle, Irish language fragments linger in older mouths, English sharpens in the younger ones. Songs from home are sung in rooms overlooking American streets. A woman stirs stew while outside a peddler shouts in another language entirely. The block becomes a place where old patterns are retained, altered, and occasionally dropped when they no longer fit. Becoming American is not an abstract act. It is what happens when home habits meet city pressures and refuse to vanish. Anti-Irish hostility remains present beyond the neighbourhood's edges, but inside the district there is safety in numbers. A person may hear contempt in a rich household, or at a hiring point, then come home to voices that pronounce things the familiar way and know why Friday matters. The local tavern, shop, and church all help transform a frightening metropolis into a map of recognisable faces. This is no small achievement. Cities can make loneliness feel architectural. Neighbourhoods answer by making belonging visible. At dusk, the block takes on a particular softness. Lamps glow behind curtains. The smell of coal smoke thickens. Mothers call children in. Someone lingers in a doorway discussing rent, weather, and a cousin's prospects with equal seriousness. A man comes home with a mortar on his sleeves. Another carries news of work on a new site. Somewhere a hymn begins. Somewhere else a fiddle follows with less piety and better rhythm. The building settles into evening, though it never fully sleeps. When you lie down at night, the mattress thin and the room warm from too many breaths, you can feel the whole house around you. A cough below, boards shifting above, the murmur of prayer nearby, the soft clink of a cup being set aside, the smell of banked coals, boiled tea, wool, and tired skin. It is crowded. It is unhealthy. It is noisy beyond reason. It is also, for many Irish immigrants, the first place in America where life stops being pure survival and starts becoming something more organised, more communal, more recognisably human. Not comfort, perhaps, but belonging in its rough city form. You discover very quickly that hard work alone does not buy welcome. A man can carry barrels until his shoulders burn. A woman can scrub linen until her hands split. And still the city may look at both of them and see a problem rather than a neighbour. In the streets, in newspapers, in election talk, and in certain Protestant pulpits, the Irish immigrant becomes a convenient object of alarm. Too Catholic, too poor, too numerous, too willing to vote the wrong way, too willing to drink, too willing, somehow, to exist in public. It is remarkable how offended a society can become by people trying to stay alive. Nativism is already rising in these years, and Irish arrival sits squarely in its sights. The word native itself is used rather selectively, of course. Men whose grandparents crossed an ocean become suddenly poetic about the purity of the Republic once another group begins stepping off ships in greater numbers. American political life has many traditions. Hypocrisy is among its most durable. For the Irish immigrant, prejudice does not remain abstract for long. It appears in hiring choices, in mocking cartoons, in sermons warning of papal influence, in taunts hurled from street corners, and in the easy assumption that your poverty reflects your character. You hear jokes about potatoes from men who have never had to depend on them. You hear muttered remarks about drunkenness from people who seem deeply devoted to their own taverns. A schoolboy may imitate your accent. A shopkeeper may speak slowly, as if language itself becomes dimmer in an Irish mouth. None of this is catastrophic by itself. Together it forms a climate. The newspapers can be particularly ugly. Some editors portray Irish immigrants as political dupes controlled by priests, or as disorderly masses whose presence threatens wages, morals, and public order. The images are coarse, repetitive, and effective. Caricature does not need subtlety when it can rely on fear. A woodcut or a sneer in print travels farther than your actual face ever will. This matters, because prejudice gains strength when people who have never met you feel certain they already know you. Religion sharpens the hostility. Anti-Catholic feeling runs deep in many parts of the United States during the mid-19th century. To Protestant nativists, the Irish are not only foreign and poor, they are spiritually suspect. The Catholic Church is imagined as authoritarian, foreign-directed, superstitious, and incompatible with republican liberty. Priests are viewed with suspicion. Convents attract rumour like dry grass attracts sparks. The fact that ordinary Irish immigrants are mostly concerned with rent, work, and keeping children alive does not slow the fantasy. Bigotry prefers its targets grandly menacing. Historians still debate how much anti-Catholic fear sprang from genuine theological concern, how much from political opportunism, and how much from class anxiety redirected into religious language. Likely all three played their part. It is much easier to denounce a poor immigrant if you can claim heaven agrees with you on the street. The practical effect is tension. You learn which neighbourhoods feel less safe at night. You learn which taverns are friendly and which invite trouble. You learn that groups of young men with nothing much to do and loud opinions about America are best avoided when possible. Street fights, insults, and flare-ups are not constant, but they are common enough to enter your calculations. Public space belongs more easily to those who already assume it is theirs, yet the Irish do not meet this climate only with wounded silence. They answer in the ways available to people who have little property but growing numbers. They cluster in neighbourhoods, they strengthen parishes, they create associations based on county, trade, charity, and mutual aid. They vote when they can. They attend meetings. They march in religious and civic processions. They bury their dead with public dignity. They make themselves visible not only as labourers but as a people. This is one of the central developments of immigrant life. Mere presence turns into organised presence. The parish is again crucial here. A Catholic church is not only a place of worship, it is a statement. Brick, bell, altar, and congregation all announce that the Irish are not passing through as scattered drifters. They are building institutions. Priests may serve as spiritual leaders, political brokers, defenders against slander, and collectors of practical information. Parish schools, charities, and devotional societies deepen these roots. To hostile observers, such organisation can look threatening. To immigrants, it looks like survival with structure. Politics opens another path. American city politics, especially in places like New York, is rough, transactional, local, and often less dignified than schoolbooks later pretend. This makes it oddly accessible to immigrants. Ward politics thrives on numbers. Loyalty, turnout, favours, and neighbourhood influence. An Irish labourer with no money may still possess something of value to political men. A vote, a cousin's vote, a room full of boarders' votes. Suddenly the newcomer who is treated as a nuisance in one setting becomes a useful ally in another. Democratic machines and ward organisations learn quickly that immigrant communities can be mobilised. In return for loyalty at the polls, they may offer help finding jobs, securing coal in winter, smoothing disputes with authorities, or assisting a family in crisis. None of this is pure civic virtue. It is exchange, often grubby exchange. But when formal systems ignore you, grubby exchange can look surprisingly like justice. One curious detail of urban politics is how much influence could gather in spaces that seemed casual. A tavern back room, a ward meeting above a shop, a conversation at a funeral, a handshake on a stoop after Mass. Politics in immigrant neighbourhoods is not always grand speechifying. It is often personal, local, and deeply entangled with daily need. The Republic, for many poor Irish newcomers, first arrives wearing muddy boots and asking who in the block can be counted on election day. This does not mean Irish immigrants are politically unified. Far from it. Old divisions from Ireland can linger. County rivalries matter. Class differences matter. Attitudes toward American parties and reformers vary. Some immigrants are more eager than others to plunge into party life. Some distrust it. Some simply lack the time or citizenship status to engage fully. Unity is often exaggerated later by both admirers and enemies. Still, even imperfect collective action alters the balance of city life. Nativist political movements respond sharply. Organisations such as the Know Nothings will later gain power by channeling anti-immigrant an anti-Catholic anger into a national movement, though the roots of that anger are already visible in the 1840s. Secrecy, slogans, conspiracy fears, patriotic pageantry, and electoral organising combine into a style of politics that promises to defend America by narrowing who counts as truly American. It is a familiar trick. First define the nation tightly, then accuse your rivals of threatening it, then enjoy the applause. For Irish immigrants, resistance can be formal or informal. Formal resistance includes voting blocks, church building, petitions, mutual aid societies, labour associations, and public demonstration. Informal resistance includes stubbornly keeping your accent, defending a priest from insult, refusing an evangelical tract, or answering an anti-Irish sneer with language colourful enough to leave a mark. Not every battle is fought in a legislature. Some are fought in the tone of a reply on a crowded street. Labour and politics start to intersect more clearly as Irish workers become prominent in public works and urban employment. A man who digs sewers or unloads cargo may also learn which alderman controls hiring, which ward healers distribute favours, and which election promises are worth remembering. Political literacy grows not from abstract theory alone, but from recognising where power sits and how it can be nudged. The poor are often accused of being manipulated in politics, as though the wealthy arrived untouched by influence. In truth, everyone in politics is being courted. The difference is usually the price. There is also pride at stake. Public hostility can provoke a stronger sense of group identity. When outsiders say the Irish are backward, disorderly, and unfit, many immigrants respond by asserting visible forms of dignity. Clean clothes for Sunday, careful funeral rites, processions, respect for the parish, ambition for children, determination to secure property one day. Bigotry can deform people. It can also harden resolve. Often it does both at once. Violence sometimes erupts around these tensions. Riots, brawls, attacks on Catholic spaces, and clashes around elections or public events are part of the wider American urban landscape of the era. The Irish are not always innocent in such confrontations, nor are they always the primary aggressors. Crowded cities, political rivalry, alcohol, and ethnic suspicion make a combustible mix. Scholars still argue over specific incidents and the relative weight of religion, class, and party competition in each case. What remains clear is that public order in these years is often fragile, especially where rapid immigration changes neighbourhood balance. Women participate in this political and communal resistance too, though often in ways that official accounts understate. They reinforce parish life, share neighbourhood intelligence, organise charity, uphold reputation, pressure men regarding work and voting, and shape the moral standing of families in the eyes of the community. A woman at a doorway may not hold office, but she can influence how a block thinks, remembers, and responds. Power in immigrant neighbourhoods is rarely confined to those giving speeches. Young people absorb all this quickly. Children hear anti-Irish slurs outside and family anger inside. They learn when to fight, when to ignore, when to answer in sharper English than their parents can manage. They become cultural translators, half-rooted in old loyalties and half-trained by American streets. This gives them opportunities and tensions of their own. Identity becomes something negotiated daily, not inherited untouched. A small but telling sign of resistance lies in names. Families continue using Irish naming patterns, saints' names, kin names, county loyalties, and the language of home even when the wider society urges smoother conformity. Naming a child can become an act of memory and insistence. In a city that mispronounces you, getting to name your own children is no minor privilege. The smell of politics in these neighbourhoods is less abstract than textbooks suggest. Tobacco smoke in a tavern room, wet wool steaming after a rainy March, printer's ink on a handbill, beer on the floorboards, mud on boots after an election day trudge. The sound is equally concrete. Cheers, arguments, laughter, a priest warning moderation, a ward organiser promising the impossible in a voice warm as stew. Democracy, at ground level, is noisy, imperfect, and very fond of exaggeration. By evening, when the lamps come on and the street softens into shadow, you may hear men discussing candidates, jobs, insults, rents, and rumours in one uninterrupted flow, as if all public questions naturally belong together. In a way they do. The immigrant life of the city teaches that politics is not separate from bread. It is tied to work, police, schools, churches, coal, funerals, and which group gets blamed when things go badly, and so resistance grows less from grand ideals than from repeated necessity. You are mocked, so you gather. You are excluded, so you build your own institutions. You are courted for votes, so you learn the value of numbers. You're told you do not belong, so you place your church, your family, your language, and your labour squarely within the city's daily life, until the claim becomes harder to sustain. America does not simply absorb the Irish. The Irish push back, organise, argue, pray, and vote their way into America, one ward, one parish, one bruising election, and one stubborn refusal at a time. After the first shocks of arrival, survival settles into something slower and more complicated. You wake, work, eat, pay, worry, sleep, and rise again until the rhythm itself begins to alter you. The city still feels hard, but it no longer feels entirely unreadable. Streets acquire meaning, faces become familiar, shops are judged, not merely noticed. A church bell marks the hour with something like companionship. Even the smells of the neighbourhood, coal smoke, bread, damp brick, horse traffic, and boiled cabbage, stop feeling foreign and start feeling specific. This corner, this block, this life, that change matters, because becoming American is not a single dramatic conversion. It is accumulation. One rent payment, 1 week's wages, one parish friendship, one child born on this side of the ocean, one employer who keeps you, one room slightly better than the last, one pair of boots bought with money earned in the new country. Memory of Ireland remains strong, sometimes painfully strong, but daily practice begins to plant roots elsewhere, not because the old world has vanished, but because the body must live where it wakes. In immigrant neighbourhoods, you see this transformation most clearly in families. A husband still speaks with the full music of his county. A wife keeps old cooking habits and old saints' days. A child answers in quicker English, using city slang with alarming confidence. Another child learns prayers in one language and street insults in another. Generations overlap inside one room, one table, one parish pew. America enters not as an idea, but as the accent of the youngest voice in the house. Children become the most visible sign that migration is turning into settlement. They attend school more regularly than their parents could. They learn to read signs, notices, and newspapers. They move through streets with a naturalness adults may never fully acquire. They know which vendors are generous, which alleys smell worst in summer, which teacher dislikes Catholics, and which policeman can be approached without too much dread. Their world is wider and narrower at once. Wider because the city teaches them quickly. Narrower because poverty still decides where they can safely wander. Education carries enormous promise, though not always easy comfort. Public schools can offer literacy and advancement, but they may also reflect Protestant assumptions and social contempt toward immigrant children. Catholic schooling grows in importance partly because families want instruction shaped by their faith and culture, not only by the civic ideals of people who already distrust them. Historians continue to debate how far parochial education sheltered Irish identity versus how far it slowed certain kinds of integration. Yet from the inside, the question feels more practical. Who will teach your child to read without teaching them to despise where they came from? Money, even when scarce, begins to be used with longer vision. Savings clubs, mutual aid, careful hoarding in boxes or hidden cloth purses, small loans among kin, all become part of family strategy. You start to see that wages are not merely for today's bread. They may help bring over a sister. They may bury a parent decently. They may support a son through a better apprenticeship. They may one day secure furniture that matches, or a room with better light, or a tiny bit of property on the edge of the city where air moves more generously. Ambition among the poor often looks modest from a distance. Up close, it is enormous. One curious tidbit from immigrant family life is the emotional importance of simple household objects purchased in America. A good kettle, a proper clock, a feather bed, a framed devotional print, a sturdy table. These things could carry almost ceremonial meaning because they signaled permanence. Buying them was not just consumption, it was declaration. We're not merely passing through. We belong enough to own something worth dusting. The question of belonging grows more tangled as time passes. To some native-born Americans, the Irish remain forever foreign. To some Irish immigrants, America remains forever somewhat crude, Protestant, and overly fond of telling people what freedom ought to feel like. But daily exchange softens certain boundaries. Workplaces mix groups, even when tensely. Streets force encounter. Politics makes alliances convenient. Markets, schools, and neighborhoods teach a sort of rough coexistence. Becoming American does not always mean being embraced. Sometimes it means learning how to function, insist, and advance within a society that resists embracing you fully. For men, political participation often becomes one of the strongest routes into public belonging. Citizenship, voting, ward activity, and party loyalty bring visibility. A labourer who owns little may still possess political weight. Over time, Irish names begin appearing more often in city offices, police ranks, fire companies, and local party structures. This process is uneven and far from complete in the famine years, but the direction is clear. Communities once seen merely as burdens begin to convert numbers into influence. Women shape belonging just as powerfully. Though often through less publicly celebrated channels, they anchor households, preserve religious practice, manage saving, supervise children's moral worlds, maintain kin ties across the Atlantic, and define what respectability looks like inside the neighbourhood. A mother deciding whether a daughter stays in service, enters a factory, or marries is making social history in an apron. A widow keeping boarders and paying rent on time is doing the same. Public records notice men more often. Kitchens and stoops notice the truth. Letters continue to tie immigrant life to Ireland. News crosses the ocean slowly but insistently. A death, a marriage, a crop report, a plea for passage money, a cousin considering emigration, a brother already in Liverpool waiting for funds. The letter itself often carries the smell of its journey. Paper, ink, damp, a trace of smoke or handling. Hands unfold it carefully. Eyes move over the lines once, then again, then aloud to others. The room changes while it is being read. Memory becomes immediate. Distance becomes personal again. Remittances, when possible, are among the most powerful ways immigrants remain tied to home. Money earned through American labour flows back across the ocean in small, hard-won amounts that can alter another family's fate. Historians still debate the full scale and social effects of these remittances during and after the famine years, but their moral importance within families is unmistakable. A few dollars can mean survival, passage, rent, or relief. The immigrant wage, thin as it feels in New York, may look miraculous in a village kitchen in Ireland. At the same time, return becomes less likely for many. Some always speak of going back once money is made, once parents are secure, once conditions improve. Yet years pass. Children are born. Graves appear in American cemeteries. Habits deepen. The old parish in Ireland remains beloved, but it starts to belong more to memory than to future plans. This is one of migration's quiet sorrows. The imagined return can sustain you for years even when life is already building itself elsewhere. Memory itself changes shape. In the early months, Ireland may be remembered with raw ache, the exact lane, the field wall, the smell of peat smoke at dusk. Later, memory can become more selective. The tenderness grows. The hardship sometimes softens in recollection, though never entirely. A person who fled hunger may still speak lovingly of a landscape that nearly failed them. Human attachment is not especially logical. It is faithful to textures, voices, and losses more than to systems. The American-born children of immigrants complicate this further. They inherit stories of famine, departure, debt, faith, landlordism, and the Atlantic, yet they do not inherit them in their bodies the same way. Their hunger may be real, but it is urban hunger. Their enemies may mock the same surname, but from a schoolyard rather than a dock. Their sense of possibility differs. Some push away old customs eagerly, others cling to them. Most do some of both. Identity in immigrant families is rarely a tidy handoff. It is more like a tug of cloth passed around a crowded room. There is also grief that never fully leaves. The famine is not only a historical event in this world, it is a continuing wound inside living families. Missing siblings, parents left behind, babies buried in unfamiliar ground, friends last seen at a quay. Those absences accompany immigrant success as surely as they accompany hardship. A man may secure steady work and still go quiet at the mention of his home county. A woman may furnish her room respectably and still unfold a letter with trembling fingers years later. Progress and mourning are perfectly capable of sharing a chair. Religion continues to help shape what kind of Americans the Irish become. Catholic parishes expand. Devotional life deepens. Feast days, sacraments, schools, charitable societies, and neighbourhood rituals create a moral world that is American in setting but distinctly Irish Catholic in tone. Outsiders may view this as separateness. Insiders may experience it as continuity. The Church offers a way to belong in the new country without surrendering the old structure of meaning. That is no small gift in an age when migration can make everything else feel provisional. Another subtle marker of becoming American is the altered relationship to time. In Ireland, agricultural life and rural poverty tied many people closely to seasons, rents, and harvests. In the city, the clock, wage week, hiring day, school term, and election cycle press harder. Life is measured differently. Saturday pay, Sunday mass, Monday washing, monthly rent. The calendar of urban America reorganizes the body and the household. You do not notice the change at first. Then one day you realize you have begun living by it. Even manners shift. You learn how to deal with landlords, how to answer officials, how to navigate markets, how to stand in a queue without appearing uncertain, how to save face in arguments, how to judge when silence serves better than pride, and when pride must be shown anyway. These are not grand constitutional lessons. They are the practical citizenship of the poor. Some Irish immigrants do rise economically over time, though rarely in ways that look swift from inside the process. A labourer's son becomes a clerk, a servant girl marries a skilled worker, a widow's boarding house supports children's schooling, a family moves from a cellar flat to a better floor, then later to a ward less crowded. Improvement often arrives in increments too small for outsiders to admire. Yet the accumulation can be profound across one generation, and even more across two. Still, not every story bends upward. Illness, drink, injury, unemployment, childbirth, and bad luck continue to cut lives short or keep families pinned at the edge of subsistence. Historians rightly warn against turning immigrant endurance into a simple success tale. Many did not prosper. Many remained poor. Many lost more than they gained. America offered possibility, not guarantee. It demanded resilience and then often rewarded it unevenly. Yet even in those limits, something lasting takes shape. The Irish leave marks on the city through labour, politics, church building, neighbourhood life, and family continuity. Streets that once treated them as temporary become places where their children grow, argue, marry, and vote. Their music, speech, devotions, jokes, and ambitions enter the wider urban fabric. Belonging remains contested, but it becomes harder to deny. Presence hardens into inheritance, and in the quieter rooms of immigrant life, where the true measure of change is often taken, you can feel the transformation most clearly. A child reading aloud by lamplight, a decent chair bought with saved wages, a loaf on the table, a wall hung with a holy image, and perhaps a family print. A mother planning for next winter, instead of merely enduring this week. A father whose body is tired but whose children know more letters than he does. These are not glamorous victories. They are deeper than glamour. Now, as the evening settles softly over the neighbourhood, the air growing still behind the window glass, You let the noise of the street recede into a distant murmur. The day has been long, and so have the years that brought you here, across hunger, water, work, and the endless negotiations of belonging. But at last, in the hush of lamplight and banked coals, the sharper edges begin to soften. You feel the rough blanket against your hands, the warmth of the room held close by sleeping bodies, the faint smell of tea lingering in the air. Outside, the city continues with its wheels and voices and restless ambition. Yet here, for a little while, things are gentler. You breathe more slowly now. The memories of wet roads in Ireland, of the bitter harbour wind, of ship timbers creaking in the dark, of stairwells, sweat, wages, prayers, and crowded suppers all drift together like distant lights over calm water. They no longer strike the heart with the same hard force. They settle, they dim. The people you have loved, lost, followed, and found seem to draw near in a kinder way, not as pain, but as presence. The room grows quieter, the lamp lowers, a child's breathing deepens somewhere far off, a cart rolls by, then fades, and you rest in that softer space where the world asks nothing more tonight. The streets can wait, the rent can wait, tomorrow can wait. For now there is only the slow comfort of stillness, the shelter of walls, the memory of hands that built a life from so little, and the deep, gentle knowledge that even after so much uncertainty, the heart can find its way toward peace.